Welcome back. It's Tuesday. I got up 7 a.m. So it's not even 9 a.m. So I think let's try reading some more. But I need many months to read it, so we just do it slow. And I need some breaks. So we just read something random about United States. But now I was reading about Virginia, but I was to read about the New York City. I still like to do that. But I did buy more paper. I did buy more paper, so I have a lot of papers. Here, I have a lot of papers. Maybe I have to think about write it down like I did this. I'm writing down because if my computer is crashing, it's not always I can open all this again. So just try to follow my list a bit. We can try to do that. That's some I will just close down. But some is important. But let's just reading because in my world it's still early morning. It's 9 a.m. I'm not awake. So let's reading and learning a bit new, but I cannot remember. That's too many years, no, too many names and years and numbers. I cannot remember 100,000 names and numbers and city names. My brain is not like that. I cannot remember many 100,000 names and numbers. Oops. Yes, I need half a minute. My American Truck Simulator computer is not working. It's crashing, so I cannot drive a truck simulator.
Roanoke Colony. Not to be confused with the inland modern city of Roanoke, Virginia. Lost Colony redirects here. For other uses, see Lost Colony, disambiguation. The Roanoke Colony, /Roanoke/Roanoke, was an attempt by Sir Walter Raleigh to found the first permanent English settlement in North America. The colony was founded in 1585, but when it was visited by a ship in 1590, the colonists had inexplicably disappeared. It has come to be known as the Lost Colony, and the fate of the 112 to 121 colonists remains unknown. Roanoke Colony was founded by the Governor Ralph Lane in 1585 on Roanoke Island in present-day Dare County, North Carolina. Lane's colony was troubled by a lack of supplies and poor relations with some of the local Native American tribes. A resupply mission by Sir Richard Grenville was delayed, so Lane abandoned the colony and returned to England with Sir Francis Drake in 1586. Grenville arrived 2 weeks later and also returned home, leaving behind a small detachment to protect Raleigh's claim. A second expedition led by John White landed on the island in 1587 and set up another settlement. Sir Walter Raleigh had sent him to establish the city of Raleigh in Chesapeake Bay. That attempt became known as the Lost Colony due to the unexplained disappearance of its population. During a stop to check on Grenville's men, the pilot of the flagship, Simon Fernandez, forced White and his colonists to remain on Roanoke. White returned to England with Fernandez, intending to bring more supplies in 1588. The Anglo-Spanish War delayed his return to Roanoke until 1590, and he found the settlement fortified but abandoned. The cryptic word Croatoan was found carved into the palisade, which White interpreted to mean that the colonists had relocated to Croatoan Island. Before he could follow this lead, rough seas and a lost anchor forced the mission to return to England. The fate of the approximately 112121 colonists remains unknown. Speculation that they had assimilated with nearby Native American communities appears in writings as early as 1605. Investigations by the Jamestown colonists produced reports that the Roanoke settlers had been massacred, and there were stories of people with European features being seen in Native American villages, but no conclusive evidence was found. Interest in the matter fell until 1834, when George Bancroft published his account in A History of the United States. Bancroft's description of the colonists, particularly White's infant granddaughter Virginia Dare, cast them as foundational figures in American culture and captured the public imagination. Background, edit. The Outer Banks were explored in 1524 by Giovanni the Verrazzano, who mistook Pamlico Sound for the Pacific Ocean, and concluded that the barrier islands were an isthmus. Recognizing this as a potential shortcut to China, he presented his findings to King Francis I of France and King Henry VIII of England, neither of whom pursued the matter. In 1578, Queen Elizabeth I granted a charter to Sir Humphrey Gilbert to explore and colonize territories unclaimed by Christian kingdoms. Gilbert had helped to crush the first of the Desmond rebellions in Ireland's Munster province in the early 1570s. The terms of the charter granted by the Queen were vague, although Gilbert understood it to give him rights to all territory in the New World north of Spanish Florida. Led by Gilbert, the English briefly claimed St. John's, Newfoundland, in 1583, as the first English territory in North America at the royal prerogative of Queen Elizabeth I, but Gilbert was lost at sea on his return journey to England. Following Gilbert's death in 1583, Queen Elizabeth divided the charter between his brother Adrian Gilbert and his half-brother Sir Walter Raleigh. Adrian's charter gave him the patent on Newfoundland and all points north, where geographers expected to eventually find a long-sought northwest passage to Asia. Raleigh was awarded the lands to the south, though much of it was already claimed by Spain. Richard Hakluyt, however, had by this time taken notice of the Roanoke Isthmus located within Raleigh's claim and was campaigning for England to capitalize on the opportunity. Raleigh's charter, issued on the 25th of March, 1584, specified that he needed to establish a colony by 1591, or lose his right to colonization. He was to discover, search, find out, and view such remote heathen and barbarous lands, countries, and territories, to have, hold, occupy, and enjoy. It was expected that Raleigh would establish a base from which to send privateers on raids against the treasure fleets of Spain. Despite the broad powers granted to Raleigh, he was forbidden to leave the Queen's side. Instead of personally leading voyages to the Americas, he delegated the missions to his associates and oversaw operations from London. Amadas Barlow Expedition, edit. Raleigh quickly arranged an expedition to explore his claim. It departed England on the 27th of April, 1584. The fleet consisted of 2 barks. Philip Amadas was captain of the larger vessel, with Simon Fernandez as pilot, while Arthur Barlow was in command of the other. There are indications that Thomas Harriot and John White may have participated in the voyage, but no records survive which directly confirm their involvement. The expedition employed a standard route for transatlantic voyages, sailing south to catch trade winds. which carried them westward to the West Indies, where they collected fresh water. The two ships then sailed north until July the 4th, when they sighted land at what is now called Cape Fear. The fleet made landfall on the 13th of July at an inlet north of Hatteras Island, which was named Port Ferdinando after Fernandez, who discovered it. The Native Americans in the region had likely encountered, or at least observed, Europeans from previous expeditions. The Secretan, who controlled Roanoke Island and the mainland between Albemarle Sound and the Pamlico River, soon made contact with the English and established friendly relations. The Secretan chieftain, Wingana, had recently been injured in a war with the Pamlico, so his brother Grainganimio represented the tribe in his place. Upon their return to England in the autumn of 1584, Amadas and Barlow spoke highly of the tribe's hospitality and the strategic location of Roanoke. They brought back two natives, Wanchus, a Secretan, and Mantio, a Croatan whose mother was the chieftain of Croatoan Island. The expedition's reports described the region as a pleasant and bountiful land, alluding to the Golden Age and the Garden of Eden, although these accounts may have been embellished by Raleigh. Queen Elizabeth was impressed with the results of Raleigh's expedition. In 1585, during a ceremony to knight Raleigh, she proclaimed the land granted to him Virginia and proclaimed him Knight Lord and Governor of Virginia. Sir Walter Raleigh proceeded to seek investors to fund a colony. Lane Colony, edit. See also, List of colonists at Roanoke. For the first colony in Virginia, Raleigh planned a largely military operation focused on the exploration and evaluation of natural resources. The intended number of colonists was 69, but approximately 600 men were sent in the voyage, with about half intended to remain at the colony, to be followed by a second wave later. Ralph Lane was appointed governor of the colony, and Philip Amadas would serve as admiral, although the fleet commander Sir Richard Grenville led the overall mission. Civilian attendants included Joachim Gans, metallurgist, Thomas Harriot, a scientist, and John White, an artist. Mantio and Wanchus, returning home from their visit to England, were also passengers on the voyage. Voyage, edit. The fleet consisted of 7 ships, the galleass Tiger, Grenville's flagship, with Fernandez as pilot, the fleboat Roebuck, captained by John Clark, Red Lion, under the command of George Raymond, Elizabeth, captained by Thomas Cavendish, Dorothy, Raleigh's personal ship, perhaps captained by Arthur Barlow, and 2 small pinnaces. On the 9th of April, 1585, the fleet departed Plymouth, heading south through the Bay of Biscay. A severe storm off the coast of Portugal separated Tiger from the rest of the fleet and sank one of the pinnaces. Fortunately, Fernandez had a plan for such an occurrence, wherein the ships would meet up at Mosquetl, on the south coast of Puerto Rico. Proceeding alone, Tiger made good speed for the Caribbean, arriving at the rendezvous point on the 11th of May, ahead of the other ships. While awaiting the fleet, Grenville established a base camp, where his crew could rest and defend themselves from Spanish forces. Lane's men used the opportunity as practice for building the fortifications that would be needed at the new colony. The crew also set about replacing the lost pinnace, forging nails and sawing local lumber to construct a new ship. Elizabeth arrived on the 19th of May, shortly after the completion of the fort and pinnace. The remainder of the fleet never arrived at Mosquetl. At least one of the ships encountered difficulties near Jamaica and ran out of supplies, causing its captain to send 20 of his crew ashore. Eventually Roebuck, Red Lion, and Dorothy continued to the Outer Banks, arriving by mid-June. Red Lion left about 30 men on Croatoan Island and departed for privateering in Newfoundland. In the meantime, Grenville established contact with local Spanish authorities, in the hopes of obtaining fresh provisions. When the Spanish failed to deliver the promised supplies, Grenville suspected they would soon attack, so he and his ships abandoned the temporary fort. Grenville captured 2 Spanish ships in the Mona Passage, adding them to his fleet. Lane took one of these ships to Salinas Bay, where he captured salt mounds collected by the Spanish. Lane again built fortifications to protect his men as they brought the salt aboard. Grenville's ships then sailed to La Isabela, where the Spanish set aside hostilities to trade with the well-armed English fleet. On June the 7th, Grenville left Hispaniola to continue to the Outer Banks. The fleet sailed through an inlet at Wokukan Island, near present-day Ocracoke Inlet, on the 26th of June. Tiger struck a shoal, ruining most of the food supplies and nearly destroying the ship. There are indications that Grenville's fleet was supposed to spend the winter with the new colony, perhaps to immediately begin using it as a privateering base. The wreck of Tiger, however, made that impossible. The remaining provisions could not support a settlement as large as had been planned. Moreover, the shallow inlets of the Outer Banks made the region unsuitable as a base for large ships. The colony's top priority would now be to locate a better harbor. After repairs, Tiger continued with the rest of the fleet to Port Ferdinando, where they reunited with Roebuck and Dorothy. The men left behind by Red Lion were presumably also located during this time. On August the 5th, John Arundel took command of one of the faster vessels and set sail for England, to report the expedition's safe arrival. Establishment of the colony, edit. The loss of provisions from the Tiger meant that the colony would support far fewer settlers than originally planned. Grenville decided that only about 100 men would stay with Lane, which would be enough to fulfill the colony's objectives until another fleet, scheduled to leave England in June 1585, could deliver a second wave of colonists and supplies. However, Grenville could not know that this expedition had been redirected to Newfoundland, to alert fishing fleets that the Spanish had begun seizing English commercial vessels in retaliation for attacks by English privateers. Until a resupply mission could be arranged, Lane's colony would be heavily dependent on the generosity of the natives. While the Tiger was under repair, Grenville organized an expedition to explore Pamlico Sound and the Secretan villages of Aquascogogue, Pamlico, and Secretan. His party made contact with the locals, presenting Harriet and White with an opportunity to extensively study Native American society. Although much of their research did not survive the 1586 evacuation of the colony, Harriet's extensive survey of Virginia's inhabitants and natural resources was published in 1588. With engravings of White's illustrations included in the 1590 edition. Following this initial exploration, a silver cup was reported missing. Believing the item stolen, Grenville sent Amadas to lead a detachment back to Aquascogogue to demand the return of the missing property. When the villagers did not produce the cup, the English decided that severe retribution was necessary in order to avoid the appearance of weakness. Amadas and his men burnt down the entire town and its crops, sending the natives fleeing. Manteo arranged a meeting for Grenville and Lane with Grainganimio, to provide land for the English settlement on Roanoke Island. Both sides agreed that the island was strategically located for access to the ocean and to avoid detection from Spanish patrols. Lane began construction of a fort on the north side of the island. There are no surviving renderings of the Roanoke fort, but it was likely similar in structure to the one at Mosquettle. Grenville set sail for England aboard the Tiger on the 25th of August, 1585. Days later, in Bermuda, Grenville raided a large Spanish galleon. the Santa Maria de San Vicente, which had become separated from the rest of its fleet. The merchant ship, which Grenville took back to England as a prize, was loaded with enough treasure to make the entire Roanoke expedition profitable, spurring excitement in Queen Elizabeth's court about Raleigh's colonization efforts. The Roebuck left Roanoke on the 8th of September, 1585, leaving behind one of the pinnaces under the command of Amadas. Records indicate that 107 men remained with Lane at the colony. However, historians disagree as to whether White returned to England with Grenville, or spent the winter at Roanoke despite his absence from the list of colonists. Exploration, edit. Many of the colonists had joined the mission expecting to discover sources of gold and silver. When no such sources were located, these men became dispirited and decided the entire operation was a waste of their time. The English also researched where the local Native Americans obtained their copper, but ultimately never tracked the metal to its origin. The colonists spent the autumn of 1585 acquiring corn from the neighboring villages, to augment their limited supplies. The colony apparently obtained enough corn, along with venison, fish, and oysters, to sustain them through the winter. Little information survives, however, about what transpired at the colony between September 1585 and March 1586, making a full assessment of the winter impossible. The colonists most likely exhausted their English provisions and American corn by October, and the resulting monotony of their remaining food sources no doubt contributed to the men's low morale. Amadas spent the winter exploring Chesapeake Bay, traveling as far as Cape Henry and the James River. While there his party made contact with the Chesapeake villages of Chesapeake and Skycoack. The Secretans had described Skycoack as the largest city in the region, possibly leading the English to expect something like the wealthy Inca and Aztec kingdoms encountered by the Spanish. Amadas instead found a more modest settlement, although he was impressed with the area's climate and soil quality. Harriet and Gans explored the Virginia Territory, meeting Native American tribes and taking stock of natural resources. During his travels, Harriet and his assistants collected data that would eventually be used to produce White's La Virginia Paz map. Although 16th century science could not explain the phenomenon, Harriet noticed that each town the colonists visited quickly suffered a deadly epidemic, which may have been influenza or smallpox. Some of the Secretans suspected the disease was caused by supernatural forces unleashed by the English. When Wingenor fell sick, his own people could not treat him, but he recovered after requesting prayers from the English. Impressed, Wingenor asked the colonists to share this power with other stricken communities, which only hastened the spread of disease. The epidemic likely had a severe impact on the fall harvest, at a time when Lane's colony would be heavily dependent on its neighbors to supplement its limited food supply. Hostilities and food shortages, edit. By spring, relations between the Secretan and the colony were strained, most likely due to the colony's over-reliance on Secretan food. The death of Granganimio, who had been a powerful advocate for the colony, apparently helped to turn Wingenor against the English. Wingenor changed his name to Pemisapan, one who watches, suggesting a newly cautious and vigilant policy, and established a new temporary tribal capital on Roanoke Island. The English did not initially recognize that these developments represented a threat to their interests. In March, Lane consulted Pemisapan about a plan to explore the mainland beyond Secretan territory. Pemisapan supported the plan and advised Lane that the Roanoke leader Menatonan was meeting with his allies to plan an attack on the English, and that 3,000 warriors had gathered at Coanoac. At the same time, Pemisapan sent word to Menatonan that the English would be coming, ensuring that both sides would expect hostilities. When Lane's well-armed party arrived at Roanoke, he found representatives of the Roanoke, Mangaak, Wepmiak, and Morituk. Since this gathering was not planning an attack, Lane caught them by surprise. He easily captured Menetonen, who informed him that it was Pemisapan who had requested the council in the first place. Menetonen quickly gained Lane's trust by offering information about lucrative opportunities in lands the English had not yet discovered. He described a rich and powerful king to the northeast, presumably the leader of the Powhatan, warning that Lane should bring a considerable force if he sought to make contact. Menetonen also corroborated rumors Lane had heard about a sea just beyond the head of the Roanoke River, apparently confirming English hopes of finding access to the Pacific Ocean. The chief's son Skyko described a place to the west called Shonistamoten rich in a valuable metal, which Lane thought could be copper or perhaps even gold. Based on this information, Lane envisioned a detailed plan in which his forces would divide into two groups, one traveling north up the Chowan River, the other along the Atlantic coast, to resettle at Chesapeake Bay. However, he decided to defer this mission until the colony received fresh supplies, which Grenville had promised would arrive by Easter. In the meantime, Lane ransomed Menetonen and had Skyko sent back to Roanoke as a hostage. He proceeded with 40 men for about 100 miles, 160 kilometers, up the Roanoke River in search of Shonistamoten, but they found only deserted villages and warriors lying in ambush. Lane had expected the Morituk to provide provisions for him along his route, but Pemisapan had sent word that the English were hostile and villagers should withdraw from the river with their food. Lane and his party returned to the colony shortly after Easter, half-starved and empty-handed. During their absence, rumors had spread that they had been killed, and Pemisapan had been preparing to withdraw the Secretary from Roanoke Island and leave the colony to starve. There was no sign of Grenville's resupply fleet, which had not yet even left England. According to Lane, Pemisapan was so surprised that Lane returned alive from the Roanoke River mission that he reconsidered his plans. Ensenor, an elder among Pemisapan's council, argued in favor of the English. Later, an envoy for Menetonen informed Lane that the Wepmiak leader Okisko had pledged fealty to Queen Elizabeth and Sir Walter Raleigh. This shift in the balance of power in the region further deterred Pemisapan from following through on his plans against the colony. He instead ordered his people to sow crops and build fishing weirs for the settlers. The renewed accord between the English and the Secretary was short-lived. On the 20th of April Ensenor died, depriving the colony of its last advocate in Pemisapan's inner circle. Wanchus had risen to become a senior advisor, and his time among the English had convinced him that they were a threat. Pemisapan evacuated the Secretary from Roanoke, destroyed the fishing weirs, and ordered them not to sell food to the English. Left to their own devices, the English had no way to produce enough food to sustain the colony. Lane ordered his men to break up into small groups to forage and beg for food in the Outer Banks and the mainland. Lane continued to keep Skyko as a hostage. Although Pemisapan met regularly with Skyko and believed him sympathetic to the anti-English cause, Skyko sought to honor his father's intention of maintaining relations with the colony. Skyko informed Lane that Pemisapan planned to organize a war council meeting on the 10th of June with various regional powers. With the copper the Secretary had gained from trading with the colony, Pemisapan was able to offer substantial inducements to other tribes to side with him in a final offensive against the English. Skyko declined to get involved, although individual Wepmiaks were permitted to participate. The plan of attack was to ambush Lane and other key leaders as they slept at the colony, and then signal for a general attack on the rest. Based on this information, Lane sent disinformation to the Secretary indicating that an English fleet had arrived, to force Pemisapan's hand. Forced to accelerate his schedule by the possibility of English reinforcements, Pemmisapan gathered as many allies as he could for a meeting on the 31st of May at Dasamungapong. That evening, Lane attacked the warriors posted at Roanoke, hoping to prevent them from alerting the mainland the following morning. On June the 1st, Lane, his top officers, and